Okay, we are up to chapter letter 17. This letter continues the theme about asking for tzedakah. This is a letter that was written in 1810. It's not even the entirety of the letter, which is extant. But remember that these letters were not published in Tanya by the Alter Rebbe. They were published later by his sons and compiled into Tanya the way we have it. This letter was written as an appeal for the Jews who were in Tzfas. And it's the same or similar theme of the previous letter, that every other mitzvah, we say the schar, the consequence of the mitzvah, and we'll talk about each of these words, exists in olam haba. Now I'm going to just leave that as the world to come, although we're going to talk a little bit here in the introduction as to what exactly we mean by that. And that tzedakah is unique in that it not only offers the rewards in the world to come, but also there is schar, there is consequence and reward for that mitzvah in this world. Now, the term olam haba, which we are using here, sometimes refers to souls without bodies. So it is a world that is yet to be. It is a world of souls without bodies. And then we have another term called Gan Eden, and that tends to refer to the time of Tchias HaMesim. Now, Tchias HaMesim, the coming to life of the dead, and even in this letter, we sometimes refer to that time, the coming to life of the dead, as Olam Haba. For example, like we say that there are a few mitzvahs that one enjoys the benefits in this world, and the principle is existence Olam Haba. You may recognize it because we say it in the morning davening. It's contained in a Mishnah, and sometimes we say it refers to Gan Eden, as in when we say that with the small letter Yud of Hashem's four-letter name, Hashem created Olam Haba. So this ties into a foundational dispute that exists in Torah, and Chassidus has a very definitive position here, which is, what is the ultimate? Is it a total seamless alliance between the physical and the spiritual, as is manifest in the coming to life of the dead? That is, in our current circumstance, the physical and the spiritual are in conflict. And whenever the spiritual is prominent, the physical is dimmed. And whenever the physical is dominant, the spiritual is dimmed. And so, God forbid, when a person passes away, that is, their physical life is over, we just refer to the person as deceased, even though their neshama lives on, because the physical has expired. However, when we'll have a time when the physical and the spiritual will be in perfect synchronicity, there'll be seamless union between them. So just as the soul lives forever, so too the body will take on the character of the soul. Pardon me, the body will take on the character of the soul, and it too will be forever. I mean, we do experience this in small little snippets. It's one of the reasons why we go to Kever Avos, why we go to the burial grounds, because even though the person's physically deceased, but there's always going to be a remnant of their neshama that is particularly associated with their physical being, and that's why the body still exists, even when it's deceased, and so on, et cetera, et cetera. So what is the ultimate goal? Is it bodies without souls? It's the old Earth first. We'll strip mine all the other planets later. We just sort of get rid of this world and move on. Or is it souls within bodies? This is the fundamental conundrum. Now, Chassidus, as you probably would guess, comes down very strongly. Pardon me. Comes down very strongly that the ultimate goal is the spiritual and the physical combined, that this physical world is a dwelling place for Hashem. It manifests the full-on totality of godliness, etc. Things that you recognize as being quoted commonly in the teachings of Chassidus, Dira b'tachtonim, make for me a sanctuary, etc., etc. Now, again, no one is quarreling about whether these exist. The question is, which is the prominent and the dominant? Now, not only is this a sort of end of days kind of discussion, which would be worth having, it's also an immediate discussion because, as we understand the ultimate objective of any activity, it also informs us of the processes through which we arrive at that activity. That is, in order to understand, or once we understand where we're headed, we understand the role of every step along the way. So there is a very sort of overly simplified dichotomy of what is the ultimate objective, and what is the process that gets us there. And it comes down, again, an oversimplification to be sure, but a generalization that will give us some insight into our daily activities as they are headed towards this goal. So that if we say that our goal is that this physical world is essentially a big nuisance, and we'd all really be better off without it. So the goal then is to essentially escape this world. What is the mechanism through which we escape this world? And that is through academic study of Torah. That when we study Torah, we're no longer sort of in this world. Yes, we of course acknowledge the world. Again, the underscore introductory point is not to overly simplify it and not to be overly literal with it, but that our primary objective is in the study of Torah. And of course, there's many source materials that would support this. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the study of Torah is equivalent of them all, etc., etc. Then there's another way of looking at it, that the ultimate goal is that the physical and the spiritual should be seen as perfect synchronicity. And then the primary mechanism to illustrate this point is mitzvah observance, because mitzvah observance is much more directly involved with the physical world. Look who's here, Mrs. Sultan. That is, if we are studying Torah, the concepts of, let's say, kosher food are not attached to the physical cow and the physical meat and milk, et cetera, et cetera. They are rather the conceptual ideas of these entities. So that is, we are fixated on the spiritual side of meat and milk, and as they manifest themselves in the halachic consequence. Whereas if we're fixated on the mitzvah actions, so then it's all about eating the matzah. And again, it's not a yes, no, I'm oversimplifying it to illustrate this point. So here's sort of the ultimate fantasy that can help us understand this distinction. If we would have infinite resource, what would we do? So there's two ways of looking at it. One is, well, we take all the Jews, we go to Mars, we build a big giant yeshiva, and we sit and study Torah all day. That would be sort of the ultimate fantastic objective. So again, what is the ultimate goal? Is to no longer be engaged in this physical world, that this physical world is ultimately a nuisance. Yes, we're here. While we're here, everybody agrees we have to engage in the world, we have to make it a more godly place, and so on, in order to not have to deal with all of the nuisance of the worldliness and so on. Or do we say, if we had infinite resources, we would bring the infinity of Hashem to the most remote of places? Because it is specifically the physical mitzvah actions, in specifically the least evidently godly of circumstances, that produces the ultimate purpose for which all of creation is designed. And again, I'm certainly acknowledging the oversimplification of the idea. This, though, plays in to, or it is the product of how we understand the ultimate goal of creation. Is it about the spiritual, that is, souls without bodies, or is it about the physical, tchiyas hamesim, souls within bodies? Meaning Mashiach will come today, then what? So one opinion is, okay, now we start working towards finally perfecting this world till we get to the point that we no longer need this world. And once we no longer need this world, we move on into spiritual souls without bodies. Or do we say, once Mashiach comes, now we illustrate how this physical world is no longer in conflict with the spiritual world. And that's why there'll be eternal physical life. Because right now the physical is limited, the spiritual is unlimited, and they battle it out. And at some point, the physical expires and the spiritual lives on forever, but they go separate ways. Can we get that the spiritual will implant itself within the physical to the point that the physical will be eternal as well? This becomes a general attitude or sort of theme or strategy that the Alter Rebbe takes in this Iggeres, in this letter. So here we go. Letter 17. Noida, we have a rule. Now, the word noida literally translates, and you find it a lot in Chassidus, probably in other writings as well. It means it is known. Now, it doesn't mean that we expect everyone to know this. And if you didn't know it, it's like, well, 1 second, I didn't know that. Did I miss a memo or something? The idea is we're going with this as an established rule. You can dispute it, but we're not discussing this now. We're taking this as a given. So this is a given. What is the given? The Besarusa de la Sata, from when something is initiated from below. So again, we often talk about, and we recognize this, that there's a distinction between the physical and the spiritual. And the two are often pulling in opposite directions. So what's going to bring them together? Somebody has to initiate this union. So there's Isarusa de la Sata, that is, we down here in this physical world, we initiate this union. And there's Isarusa de la Ela, when Hashem initiates this union. Now, we're familiar with this in very general terms. We talk a lot about how the month of Tishrei is Isarusa de la Sata. We basically initiate. Hashem says at the end of the month of Elul, just before Rosh Hashanah, that I am now stepping back. I have completed this year. And if you will so persuade me, I will once again commit myself to having this special king relationship with you. And, the theory being, if not, then I'm not going to be your king. I'm just going to be the boss, the authority. And therefore, it's all about what we do through tshuva and so on. In contrast, the month of Nisan is much more about what Hashem does, right? We are passive. We do have to get on the bus. We do have to paint our doorposts with blood. Hashem is really the one doing all of the activity. Like Hashem tells Moshe when we're standing at the Yam Suf, hey, you be quiet, just let me do this. Manna rains down from heaven, God comes down onto Har Sinai. That whole mode is much more about Isarusa de la Ela. So, which one is superior? So generally speaking, we say, if it's an Isarusa de la Ela, which means that God is the initiator of this relationship, this moment, so then the intensity is going to be far greater. However, the potential downside is it's like having a great teacher teaching that what the students can absorb is somewhat minimal. So it washes over them. And again, as we see that Hashem takes us out of Mitzrayim, splits the sea, and once we feel that God is not there, we get all panicky and we build the golden calf because it's not as internalized. In contrast, when something is a Sarusa de la Sata, that is, we initiate the relationship. So yes, it is going to be commensurate with our capacity, which means, so to speak, quantitatively, it's going to be less than. However, qualitatively, the impact is going to be that much stronger because, in fact, it embeds itself within us because of our receptivity, because we initiate the conversation or the activity, it becomes much more internalized and personalized. That when a person kickstarts within his heart this midah of chesed. Now, we can argue, we certainly do make this argument, that, well, what do you mean you started it? What gave you the prompt to start it? I woke up one morning and I decided to be a nice person. So what prompted me to do that? So again, it's never that way. Pharaoh says, this is my river and I made it. And it's the ultimate denial of any sense of gratitude and so on. Like we talk about, the Hebrew phrase for birthday is the day of being given birth to. So why am I celebrating my birthday? On my birthday, I should be calling my parents and my teachers and all the people who brought me to this point. Okay, so it's true that there is some subtlety that stirs us. Just again, to an analogy that you're familiar with, we talk about during the month of Elul that God's Rahmanis is available, the king is in the field, and so, et cetera, et cetera. What about, so are we doing this? Is it a Sarusa de Lasata, or is God doing it? Well, it's a little bit of both. God gives us a little bit of a signal, and either we pick up on it or we don't pick up on it. Again, back and forth we could go. We are presuming that there is some distinction called an Isarusa de Lasata, a stimulus and initiation that we begin, and an Isarusa de La'ela, a stimulus and and an initiation which Hashem begins. So when a person stirs up within their heart their characteristic of chesed, and remember in the last chapters we learned about the spheros, and the spheros are ways that we can put fixed terms onto concepts that are innately ambiguous or infinite. So chesed is about limitless, and here Rachmanis is about compassion. So we're talking here on the positive side. So it's a healthy sense of limitless, and it's a healthy sense of compassion. I'll call hatzrichim l'rachamim, on anybody who is in need of Rachmanis. So anytime we initiate this relationship and this character trait, is Sarusa de La'ela. We stimulate Hashem to respond in kind. Now we know this even from many interpersonal reactions. If we display kindness, we're more likely to get kindness back. Now, some people are just nasty, and no matter how much you display kindness to them, they're just going to be nasty to you, or they're self-absorbed, or whatever it may be. Hashem doesn't operate that way. And in a healthy person, if we demonstrate kindness, they respond with kindness. Again, hopefully all of us, in most social situations, if somebody asks you for a reasonable favor, most people are cooperative. Now, this gets abused and people bully, etc. But we're talking about in our relationships with Hashem. So if we demonstrate kindness and compassion, Hashem responds in kind. Rachamim rabim mimokar harachamim. So Hashem responds to us with abundant rachamim, so we get much more than we invest, from the source of all rachamim. So we have a kind of basic given here, based on what it says. This is a quote, it's originally from the Zohar. And the Alter Rebbe's emphasis here is that when we act in a certain way, we get a response, but we get it in a godly way. And since we're getting it in a godly way, we get it from a far deeper, more profound manner. You know, it's just the tiniest bit, as the Gemara says, that if we will open up like a pinhole, Hashem will open up like the expanse of a ballroom. We have to make that effort. Why do we have to make that effort at all? Well, there's a number of explanations. One explanation is because we have to participate. God does not want it to be what is called bread of shame, where we're just a recipient. He wants us to be engaged. That's one. Two, if we don't engage, then Hashem can give us all of the Rahmanis, but we're completely oblivious to it. You've all heard, I'm sure they have these studies where they take some great cellist or something and they put him in a subway or in what do you call it, in an airport, and he's playing the cello, but there isn't all of the surroundings and people didn't pay all this money to come and hear him. So they walk by and they take a half notice. So which one is it? Is it because you paid $200 to go to the orchestra and you got dressed up like you're going to the opera and you're in the mindset? That's what makes it. And the guy comes out and he's wearing tails and there's the lighting and there's this glimmering piano. And that's what makes the sound so beautiful? Or is the sound innately beautiful? You know, you could go back and forth about it. It's again another subject or opportunity for manipulation, where they create all of this opulence, and then you become, wow, they must be so fancy. Look how many people are here. Look at how beautiful this place is, but it's all a Hollywood set, and there isn't any substance behind it. So which one is it? Is it that we put ourselves in this mindset, like I'm using the analogy, where the person goes to the opera and they dress for the opera and they spend the money and so on, and then they have this incredibly moving experience, whereas if they just heard the same music being played out in the park or in the subway or in the airport, they wouldn't even flinch. So in part, that's what it is here. We have to invest ourselves in this manner to create it, rather than sort of stand there with folded arms and say, well, impress me. And then it will never be impressive. So what is it that we get from Hashem? As you look here in the words the Alter Rebbe writes, we not only get rachamim rabim, which means abundant rachmanis, that is, we put in a little kind of effort, and what we get from Hashem is something far greater. It's much more than what we invested. If we could somehow grade the investment and the return on the investment, we get it also from a far deeper level, this level which the Alter Rebbe describes as makar harachamim, the source of rachamim. That is, the higher than even the spheres. So remember, we talked a lot about the spheres in the last letter as being tangible terms to describe something which is innately really indescribable. It's essentially infinite. And the description of the spheres is an insight into these characteristics. It gives us a way to talk about them. Now, what are the spheres? Again, we all go through this somewhat intuitively. If a person is feeling a great emotional stirring, so they feel a great love. So if they just blurt out the love, it comes out clumsy and non-communicative and so on. So what do they have to do? They have to rein in that emotion. Then they have to intellectually organize that emotion within themselves, and then they have to start to formulate a mechanism for expressing that emotion. And sometimes, if they're really, really skilled at it, they express that emotion in a manner that the recipient absorbs, absorbs the full-on intensity of what it is that they're feeling. We are not so good at it, which is why there's a whole industry of Hallmark cards, because it's just very difficult for us to take this type of intensity. Now, the upside, of course, of that process, which is what we call hishtalshelus, which means like a chain, it's a progression. You can sort of map it out from this intensity down to the expression. And this is what makes great poets and great artists and great playwrights and great expressions. It's not that they have different words than we have or different paints than we have. The great artists can do it with crayons. Is the capacity to take it through the hishtalshelus, and at the tail of the hishtalshelus still communicate the intensity of the original stirring and emotion. However, it always is going to, pardon the pun, by definition, be defined, because it's going to go through this process called the hishtalshelus. What the Alter Rebbe is referencing here is that when we engage in rachamim and chesed, we touch Hashem's source of rachamim. That is not step one in the hishtalshelus, the progression that's orderly and procedural. We reach into the level that is the source of that stimulation that then manifests itself in all of those proceedings. So that's the full-on intensity. And again, hopefully we've all had some intense experience like that where you can't really articulate it. And the only way to articulate it is to sort of numb it down, dumb also, but I'm saying the word numb it down to a point, because otherwise you can't really express it. And this is that kind of intensity that we're shooting for. And it's experiential, you can't describe it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here in this context, what we're talking about at the most tangible level, an appeal for tzedakah. Again, probably everybody, I don't know, has encountered somebody in their life who has no idea what you're talking about, not just when it comes to being financially supportive. But the whole idea that I should do something for somebody else without any anticipation of it accruing back to me, a little bit like we spoke about the idea of lishma, that I just do it because Hashem wants me to, or I just do it because it's the right thing. They have no idea what you're talking about. This is not part of their conscious life awareness. This idea, why should I give that person something that's mine? They don't even know what you're talking about. It's completely outside. Now, again, whatever, it's the product of some sort of training. I mean, why do we anticipate that somebody knows how to drive just because they've been in a car? We don't, right? And then they say, okay, now you're 16. We're going to give you driving lessons. Well, why do we anticipate that people will be kind and generous unless there's some sort of training going on? So to here, this is the point Alter Rebbe is saying, that when we act that way, it is an effort. It's not just that, well, we are intuitively that way, that we come out of the factory. When we make effort, Hashem makes effort. And again, in an upside, not commensurate with what we do. We do a pinhole, Hashem, the ballroom, as we discussed. Excuse me. That Hashem gives us the benefits, literally the fruits or the interest from what we have gleaned, and the core of it awaits us in Olam Haba. Now, this is a quote from a Mishnah. We say it every morning in Shachris, right there in the beginning. Elu Devarim Shein Lehem Shir. We talk about these are the matters that have no limitation. These are the things. And we describe certain mitzvahs whose benefits are felt in this world, but their essence remains for us in Olam Haba. Now, as we've talked about in the beginning, what is Olam Haba? Is it souls without bodies, souls with bodies? We'll try to get to that as we come along. But the common understanding is that unlike all mitzvahs, which have some humanly appreciating benefit, like we read in the Torah in a few weeks, where you read, if you will follow in my path, I will grant you rain in its time. So again, even mitzvahs that in themselves do not innately seem to be reasonable and logical, we understand that Hashem runs the world. This is his world. And we would be wise to follow his instruction, both because that is how you operate this machine called life. And Hashem has told us this is how you can operate this machine. And because ultimately he pulls the strings. So he's in charge of the rain. So by following his instructions, we'll get rain. Why is it that he wants this or he wants that? Again, if we understand it, like we say, well, I understand that I should honor parents because that creates a stable society and I shouldn't steal, so I won't be stolen from, et cetera, then there is the logic. Even when there's not logic, I say, well, God is running the world. But for these special mitzvahs that we're talking about here, we get some of the spiritual benefits of the world. Meaning we're not just getting the benefit of how it impacts society and it makes for a better functioning community. We're actually going to accrue some of the spiritual benefits associated with it without harming the principle that remains for us. That we get in this world is similar to what we get in the world to come. That's the distinctive characteristic. The Tanya's lesson is that in this world, we do get a glimpse through these mitzvahs in the impact of the mitzvahs that is ordinarily only accessible in the world to come. So the difference between this limited list of mitzvahs that we describe as enjoying the fruits thereof in this world, and the principle remains in the world to come, in contrast to many other mitzvahs that we can all see the benefit of it. We see the benefit of treating your employees properly creates a healthy society. We see the benefits of returning lost items so that people are respectful. That's not what we're talking about here, because again, that's true of every mitzvah. Even a mitzvah that I may not understand its value, the fact that I obey Hashem's instruction, at some level, I know that it's good because God is in charge. He created the world. He has my best intentions, et cetera, et cetera. These distinctive mitzvahs, one of them being this, acts of kindness, when we say that we experience the reward or part of the reward, the fruits of the reward in this world, what we're saying is we have the spiritual experience of the fruits of those labors in this world like they will be in the world to come. Meaning, we don't envision the world to come as saying, well, there you have the most just society. There's an old saying, it's a little off topic, that if a person passes and they wake up and they're in the place that has the US Constitution, they know they've gone in the down elevator. Because in the up elevator, everybody knows what to do. You don't need to have rules. That's a little bit cynical of a description. But what we're saying is, we do not envision the concept of the world to come, that is souls without bodies or souls in this perfect union with bodies, as just being a place where everybody is kind and systems, everybody returns lost items and nobody lies and we can beat our swords into plowshares. There's something different about the spiritual consequence of each of these mitzvahs that we can experience even in our human life and our human existence. And again, it's a difficult thing to put our finger on, say, well, does that mean I get an extra cookie? Does that mean I have more fun or I have more things? Because we are, not us, we're perfect, but we're so conditioned to the human benefits that it's hard for us to imagine what does it mean to be at a spiritual benefit. And that's that sort of uplift that we're talking about here. Again, it's not just that you benefit from these mitzvahs in this world. You benefit from every mitzvah in this world, as we talked about. Even if I don't see the value of this behavior, I benefit in this world from the fact that I'm obeying Hashem. Here, we're talking about something different, that I touch to that Kedusha level. I get uplifted outside of that level. Okay. Peidish, what does this mean? Peidish hu ashpa nishpas mimakar rachmin. That the peiros, the fruits, are the expression of something that is outside the process of the hishtalshelus, the source of everything. So, man, we're probably familiar with the Alter Rebbe saying, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Olam Haba, I just want you. So, when we have this type of intense connection, that's not about some thing, it's not about some achievement, it's not about some activity, it's not even about something tangible. We become unified in union with the source of Ishtalshalis. It's again, it's not something that we can really articulate, as evidenced by the fact that I can't articulate it. But hopefully everybody is understanding this, or experiencing, and has experienced this in their own life, where there's this absolute sense of union with the infinity of Hashem. It's not about the Hishtalshalis. It's from that which is the source of the Hishtalshalis. It's like a parent-child relationship, whether it's talking about a parent with a young child, or it may be a child with an elderly parent. What do you need from them? You can make your own food. You have your own house. You don't need them to teach you how to drive or cross the street or make you lunch. So it's not that you need something from them. It is simply the need to be one with them. Like we always talk about, if I say I fear God because otherwise I'll get punished, then I'm not fearing God, I'm fearing punishment. If I say I love God because he gives me so much, then I don't love God. I love the things that I get. So it's this type of intense love that's inarticulatable, because it reaches to the source of what then becomes articulated. That's what we are able to get a glimpse of distinctively with these mitzvahs, in contrast to all the other mitzvahs. And again, even the chok mitzvahs that have no rational understanding, we get the benefit of knowing that, well, we're following Hashem's instruction and he probably knows what he's doing. And he's going to reward us because we're following his instructions, etc. Those are the things that we discussed. Okay. And this source of life, Hashem, the nimsheches lamata mata bebechinas hashtalshalos oilemus memayla lamata. Ad shemislabesh b'soim hazeh hagashmi b'banei chayim mezayna v'chulu. V'keren hu k'mashakasuv rochva mitzvascha miyoid. Now, here we go. What is this distinction? This idea that we can experience the full-on intensity of the infinity of Hashem, not the way it's manifested some particular, and bring that down into this physical world, into tangible things like healthy children and parnasa and health and so on. This illustration of this particular consequence of this specific group of mitzvahs not only illustrates, well, this is what these mitzvahs happen to do, it again informs us about the entirety of the purpose of creation, which is to bring on the full-on infinity of Hashem into the most tangible manifestation. Now, the Alter Rebbe hasn't said it yet, but we're all ready to leap out of our seats and guess, how do we do that? That's mitzvah actions. Meaning, and again, it's not one to the elimination of the other. I don't want to misrepresent it. When a person studies Torah, and they're studying about a physical mitzvah, they're studying about a character trait, about being kind, about eating matzah, about returning lost items. In that moment that they are studying it, they are not returning lost items, they are not eating matzah, and they are not doing an act of kindness. So in that moment, they have become lifted out of this world. And there is, of course, a great value in that. What we're leading up to is that when we do a mitzvah, particularly these certain subset of mitzvahs, we are in that moment absolutely experiencing the full-on infinity of Hashem. That is the level of godliness. Yes, it is manifest in a very specific behavior. And what we are doing in that moment is completing that circuit and bringing the full-on infinity of Hashem into this physical world. And that's why there's so much value in the one-time mitzvah action. The one time the person shakes the lulav and esrog, the one time a person puts on phone, the one time there's one action, in that moment, the full-on infinite intensity of Hashem that is more personal than even the Hishtalshalos, even the highest of the Sfiros, it is the full-on intensity is brought into this physical world.
Rabbi, excuse me, real quick question. Does it then stay here?
That is the excellent point. That is exactly where we're headed. So the brief answer is it does, because whenever something is done, it's actually based on last week's Parsha, whenever something is done purely for Hashem, it has an eternal impact. However, because we live in the world of time and yesterday fades, so our capacity to experience it diminishes. But it is, in fact, here in this physical world. And this is why we have designated holy places. I mean, why are we going to Yerushalayim and going to the spot of the Beis HaMikdash that's been destroyed for 2,000 years? Because when there's such an intensity, it's there eternally. And we do this probably personally. Oh, this is where I first met this person. This is where that happened, and etc. Even though, everybody's just going about doing their business in that spot, but it has a meaning to us that we can be sensitized to. So yes, that's the ultimate goal. Again, as sort of leading us down this path, is that the whole world should have this kind of awareness. I mean, right now there's this sort of tension between the physical and the spiritual. The physical says I'm here, and the spiritual says I'm here, and there's a little quarrel. But every once in a while, like my example, when people go, let's say, to the Koisel, they don't say, oh, these are interesting rocks, right? They don't see them as rocks. They understand it's a physical manifestation of something spiritual. Well, imagine if we saw that everywhere. We saw in every physical thing that this is only a physical representation of the spiritual. The physical is not fighting with the spiritual, it's expressing the spiritual. So there's two ways to do it. One is to ignore the physical, is to completely detach myself from the physical. I'll use this word, it's a little unfair, but it's like an escapism, but it's not a bad thing. It's a nice thing to do once in a while, to not have to deal with the physical, like Yom Kippur and so on. But then we're basically still conceding that the physical and the spiritual can't get along. Well, right, if I put one kid in this room, one kid in that room, they don't fight. But that's not really what we mean, or that's not our ultimate objective in bringing about a union between them. Not that we just keep them isolated and separated. In shul, you could, Chaim, and out in the world, I'm Charlie, and I leave holiness in shul and scratch your eyes out at work, and then come back from mincha. we're trying to bring out total oneness and unity. So again, that's what's the ultimate manifestation of that is the coming to life of the dead, where the physical and the spiritual cease to be in conflict with one another. So here we see that the pasuk says, "Rachva mitzvascha mi'oid." The standard interpretation is, the pasuk reads, "For everything I can see the end, but for mitzvahs they are too wide to see the end." You can't see the end of mitzvahs. The Tanya emphasizes that the singular phrase suggests that this mitzvah, it's not all mitzvahs. It should have said, or we would have anticipated it to say, mitzvah secha with a yud there. I mean, this is only really, it's hard to communicate it in English, but if you look at the Hebrew, the original pasuk says mitzvascha, mem tzadik vav taf chaf, which is your mitzvah, and it's saying that your mitzvah, the mitzvah, is too wide. You can't ever get your arms around it. Even the tallest mountain stops at some point. But your mitzvah or not. Now, we would have anticipated that this is true of the many mitzvahs, and the plural form would have read, and again, it's only in the Hebrew, mitzvah secha with the yud, your mitzvahs, not your mitzvah. So there's some specific mitzvah that we are pointing out. And also, what does it mean that it's the widest of mitzvahs? What does that mean that it's wide? Ella mitzvahska daika. What is the singular mitzvah? He mitzvahs hatzedakah. That is the mitzvah of tzedakah. She mitzvahs Hashem, which is called God's mitzvah. In fact, as we are familiar, in the Talmud, whenever it says the word chag, which just translates as festival, it's a reference to Sukkot. Pesach is called Pesach, Shavuos is called Shavuos, but chag is a reference to Sukkot. And there's explanations why is Sukkot the sort of primary. Well, in the Jerusalem Talmud, whenever it uses just the word mitzvah, without saying which mitzvah, the presumption is the mitzvah of tzedakah. And again, we understand because it is the ultimate illustration of transforming the physical into the spiritual, the ultimate tangible. There's a story told that when the Rebbe visited Camp Gan Yisrael in the 1950s, they walk around. You know how camp is. They hang up all these signs and these slogans and so on. So it was like a visiting day. So they put up a sign that said something like, "Money is the root of all evil. Plant some roots here. Tip your waiter." Something like that. It's one of these like funny things. So the Rebbe looked at it, and the Rebbe said, "Well, not necessarily. Money doesn't have to be the root of all evil." Again, the idea being because you can transform it, but as we know, it leads us often down very much of a keeping score kind of mentality, and much less about the Kedusha. But when we can transform it into a transparency for holiness, that is ungraspable. You can never get your arms around that. So this is what the Alter Rebbe says. Al mitzvahs chadaiki mitzvahs tzedakah. She mitzvah Hashem mamash masha HaKodesh Baruch Hu b'chveidei u'v'atzmai oisa tomi l'hachi oisa oilamos. This that Hashem, with his full-on intensity and his full-on personal, because this type of tzedakah, just like a person, in order to earn money, invests their life, they invest their identity, they invest their physical being. Sometimes there's even danger in the work that they do. And of course, even if they're very wealthy, the fact is that whatever money they had could have been the money through which they bought food to live. And when they are able to see that as something godly, and to be able to utilize that as an illustration of the infinite of godliness, they have in fact invested their very identity and their very being into this existence. And this is, Mika Amcha Ki Yisrael, who was there like the people Israel, that people, who can earn money, whether they're rich or poor, but it's easiest to illustrate, in the most quote unquote wealthiest of people, that their greatest pride is their tzedakah. They're again, we shouldn't be, everything should be humble and be the miser of the town that really is giving all the tzedakah. But that should be not that they bought a yacht, and not that they have this car, not that they went on that vacation, etc. but that they should take their greatest emphasis on the activities that they're able to financially support is truly b'chvoidoi va'atzmai, their very identity and their very being. Okay. That Hashem is greatest tzedakah is what he's doing every moment that he's giving us existence. We told the story many times about Rabbi Lou. He came to Farbrengen in a certain city, and one night he Farbrengen for the boys, and the boy asked him, what do you do if you feel your whole relationship with Hashem is one-sided? It sort of took him by surprise. And when he shared this with the girls, a girl popped up and said, well, of course, look at everything Hashem does for us. And what do? A little davening and something, but look what Hashem does for us. So the ultimate tzedakah that Hashem does is he gives us our existence. He gives us our life for nothing. We didn't earn it. It's like offering friendship to somebody for what? For no reason. We didn't sign a contract. All we did was we pledged to be good and not bad, and then off we went. And he will continue to do with even greater strength and even greater enthusiasm. Like it says. Now, our Rebbe points out that sometimes in Tanya, and this is true in other rabbinic writings as well, when you want to bring evidence to a concept, you quote a pasuk, reasonable thing, and it would say, Kim Moshe Kasav, as it is written. So I want to bring proof. I make a statement. I have to bring the bibliography that substantiates that what I'm saying has got some truth to it. I didn't just make it up off the top of my head. So I would say, Kim Moshe Kasav. Sometimes it says, U Kim Moshe Kasav, and as it says, or like it says. Kamoi means similar to what it says. And that's an indicator that the pasuk we're about to quote, it's not an absolute rock solid source for what we're saying. It's simply suggestive of what we're saying. But there's a subtle distinction there. Maybe it's a much more sort of gotcha academic environment where somebody says something and somebody goes, where does it say that? You made that up. And then the person has to give some source material. And then, of course, we yell at him for not being original. You can't win, You're original? Well, you made that up. You bring source material for it, so then what are you doing? You're just telling us what it says. So it's a precarious balancing act. I imagine it exists in secular academics as well. We want to have some substantiated precedent, and then we can become creative and curious. But if you're just totally off the wall, then nobody takes you seriously. Well, certainly in Torah, it's always got to be based on something. But that basis isn't always an absolute one-to-one sort of description. So here, where the Alter Rebbe uses this vav prefix, and he says, ukamoi shekos, like it says, v'shomru derech Hashem l'aseh tzedakah. We'll talk about this, that he guarded the way of Hashem. I'll give you the context in a moment. To do tzedakah, chulu. Kamo derech shehochem ba mi'ir li'ir al derech mashal. Like a path, that is the way of Hashem, is described as a path to get you from place to place. So a little background. Where is this pasuk? It's in the story. This pasuk is originally in the story of Hashem doing something a little unusual, not unprecedented in Torah, where the narrator of Torah, as we've talked about before, who's the narrator of Torah? Because it doesn't say, in the beginning, I created heaven and earth, and then I said, so it's not written in the first person. So we describe it as being the Atzmas of Hashem, and that's why each of the names of Hashem are different ways in which Hashem expressed himself. So then Torah sort of speaks to us, the readers of Torah. It's like a narrator, and says, can I conceal from Abraham what I intend to do? This is Hashem, I'm going to use a funny word, justifying to us, the readers, why Hashem, is telling Abraham about the plan to destroy the people of Sodom. Okay, so you recognize the story. God says to Avram, the evil of Sodom has come before me. And Avram says, I'll find you 50 righteous, 45, 40, etc. So Hashem tells us for the first time, why is he telling this to Hashem? What to Abraham? Why does Hashem, quote unquote, feel obligated to tell this to Avram. So it says, Hashem says, like thinking out loud, or the narrator, or you get the literary sense, shall I conceal from Abraham what I intend to do? Why not? Because I know that he will teach his children the way of Hashem. What is the way of Hashem? To do tzedakah umishpat. So what is the way of Hashem? So we say, what is the way of Hashem? 613 mitzvahs. Well, there's still something very particular, tzedakah and justice. So Hashem is telling us, the readers, and again, this is what leads Abraham, just to finish that story, to describe to Hashem that I am like dust and ash, that even Abraham's chesed, which is like the highest chesed that we can imagine, is only like the ash from the original material that is Hashem's chesed. Hopefully you recall this from 2 letters ago, that Abraham's level of chesed is just like the remnant of Hashem's infinite level of chesed, as we discussed there at length. That's that whole story there. So that's this unprompted, an undeserved attempt to save the people of Sodom. Right? I mean, Hashem doesn't say to Avram, well, what do you think about that? Should I do it? He just tells him, and then Avram picks up on the prompt. We often compare that, unlike Noah, that Hashem said, I'm going to destroy the world. Again, not that everybody could be Abraham, but Noah didn't pick up on that. Or some say he saw that they couldn't find 10 righteous people. It was so hopeless. Whatever it is, the point that's directly relevant here is that it describes this idea that Hashem is going to sort of move from place to place. What is it that prompts Hashem to, it's a kind of a funny way of saying it, to relocate, meaning to bring himself here, not just the Hishtalshalis that goes through this whole process, but to truly express himself. So maybe it's worth backing up here. Remember, this time we're trying to be more precise on every word. There's an oft-quoted dispute that is summarized in the song that everybody knows. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. So out there in the world of Torah, there's a very definitive position, I'm talking about Torah people, that says you can't say that. God is not here, there, and everywhere. God is in heaven. God is not in this physical world. And Chassidus, of course, takes a very strong opposition to that. This is the whole doctrine of Tzimtzum, that some interpret it to be literal, that God is in heaven. We interpret it to be non-literal, that God is in this world, but he's less evident, and so on. Now, one of the strong arguments against the Chassidus, is from Parshas Yisro, where it talks about the 10 Commandments, and just before the actual enunciation of the 10 Commandments, the pasuk reads, "Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai." Now, you put that into Google Translate and you look it up in every Chumash that I've ever seen. It translates these very standard words as, and God descended on Mount Sinai. So they say, you see, God's in heaven. One time he came down to Sinai. It was a one-time event, but otherwise God is in heaven. And that seems to really substantiate their position. So then we push back. We say, if you look in Onkelos, he translates it as God revealed himself at Sinai. Not that he physically relocated, but he revealed himself. So back here, what does it mean, the derech Hashem, the path of Hashem? We do this all the time. A derech means a road. It's a way to get from point A to point B. We also use it as a sort of philosophy, that this is the path that he's following. This is the conceptual idea. So what do we mean here? What is the mechanism for the revelation, like God coming down to Mount Sinai means God revealed himself at Mount Sinai? What is the prompt that brings or stimulates Hashem to reveal himself? That is his very essence, not the spheros, makor harachamim, the source of rachamim. Again, not the particulars of something of Hashem's chesed and gevura, rather the core essence of Hashem's very being, the source. That's this question. What motivates Hashem to express himself, that is, to travel from hidden to revealed, specifically? Again, every mitzvah gets a consequence. Follow in my statutes, I'll grant you rain in its time. but there's a what's the phrase, quid pro quo there, right? We do the mitzvah, we get rain. And sometimes we feel, okay, look, how many mitzvahs I got to do to get how much rain that I need? What do I got to do to get what I need? I'll follow along my path. I want to get what I'm in need of. It's a process. And here what we're saying is it's something more than just getting something from Hashem, like we talked about, but it is getting the full-on intensity of the infinity of Hashem. That is the derech, that is the path. Kach tzedakah, so too tzedakah. He bechinas giloi varas orin seif baraklu soivev kolam. Tzedakah prompts this characteristic of the revelation of soivev. Remember, the word soivev means to encircle. It's not some particular item. You know, what is this going to do for me? We might call it the culture and so on. It's not just about some particularism. What do I got to do to get that? And when we have this sort of contentious relationship, so then everything is an infinite bargain. Well, if I do this, will I get that? If I do it 3 times, will I get 3 times as much? What do I got to do to get in the bonus round? Here, this is, again, the constant theme of Tanya, that we are appealing for committing ourselves to a relationship with Hashem, not just about a mercantile exchange of goods and services, that we do this and God gives us something in return. That's this idea of soive that we can reach specifically through tzedakah. So now we go back to that Mishnah and we understand this idea that these are the mitzvahs that you get the fruits of them in this world, and the principle awaits you in the world to come. Again, we argue, well, that's every mitzvah. Every mitzvah benefits us in this world. Every mitzvah is something good about it that we get. That's always the case. Here, what we're emphasizing is we're not just getting something of it, we're getting that full-on olam haba. Like we say, this is me'ein olam haba. So we use that, it's a taste of the world to come. It's a phrase that we use. So sometimes we use it to say, this is so delicious, it's like olam haba, because that's a little bit of our childish usage of it. But we don't imagine that olam haba, or what we call heaven, or even the coming to life of the dead, is again where we get all of the physical pleasures that we have. It's about this total alignment with the infinity of Hashem. An absolute alignment with the infinity of Hashem is what we are able to experience from these select few mitzvahs. All the other mitzvahs, we get some tangible human benefit from it. Again, it creates a stable society. It gives us nostalgia. It teaches us, this is a little bit what we talked about Lishma, where we are committed to the mitzvah for no reason. It's not meaningful to me. I don't get it. I don't like it. There is what's it called, apocryphal anecdote that they asked the guy from the FBI, what are you going to do once they repeal prohibition? Like, you've been chasing down all of these bootleggers. What are you going to do? He said, I'll have a drink. Meaning, I don't care whether you drink or not. They repeal it. I only care about the law. And if it's illegal, I don't do it. It's legal, I'll do it. I have no personal connection to it. So it is these select mitzvahs that give us access to the true one infinity of Hashem. Not something that I get from Hashem, but from Hashem, his absolute self. All right, we'll stop here.